Welcome to this video on OWASP Top 10 Security Risk. Over the next couple of videos, we are going to focus on OWASP Top 10 because these different vulnerabilities and these different security risks that OWASP has discovered focus at the source code level of software. So that's where you are going to see a lot of questions on the exam in reference to the source code and how the source code should be properly built and also configured to prevent common security risk and vulnerabilities. Now, the OWASP Top 10 has been around for quite a while, and again it's by the OWASP Foundation, the Open Web Application Security Project. While these are focused on web application based risk, they also play a huge role in developed software as well. They are targeting the most critical security risk to the web applications. But this is going to translate over the software in general as well. So that's why we are going to focus on this over the next few videos. Now, the OWASP Top 10 are the 10 highest perceived risk to the web-based applications, and they are ranked based on industry feedback and mapping to the MITRE Common Weakness Enumeration. Now, the CWEs are derived from all that industry feedback, and these are the common software and hardware weakness within various components. So it's sort of common language that all we use, and it's considered pretty much a measuring stick for the different security tools and other things similar to like the OSI model in how communication happen at the various layers. The CWE is the same exact thing where we are mapping common vulnerabilities, common risk to different parts of the software, different parts of hardware, and so on. Okay, so that's the top 10. Now for the exam, you are likely going to see question about the 2017 version of this. There is 2021 version, but I would not expect to see questions about 2021 until probably the middle of the year 2022-2003. So we are going to focus heavily on 2017, but I will cover the updates for 2021 just in case you see them. And over the next few videos, we are going to cover all 10 of these. Okay, so let's start with the highest risk of 2017, which is injection attack. This is when you are sending untrusted data to a command interpreter in an attempt to manipulate data. In other words, an attacker is trying to send unauthorized data to a software application and trying to get the software application to process it. So the software should be able to prevent this. It should be designed to prevent invalid inputs and limit the commands and the interface capability. What has to be built into the source code is what calls escape sequence. This is basically means you ought to recognize that, boom, and get rid of it. Right now, the most modern day application and most modern languages such as Ruby and things like that are built with escape sequence in them. However, legacy software is not, and it becomes very good target for this. Now, these inputs are going to be used to call data on the backend database. So the web application is connected to database of some kind, and therein lies where the data is stored. So this application will call to the database and display the information. So we don't want that to happen, right? If they are not authorized to see that. So what we want to do in our application is we want to use approved and stored software procedure. So these are pre-prepared code statements that are whitelisted for the web application and the backend database. And if anything does not match within that whitelisted or match that stored procedure, then it gets escaped or it gets dumped in this case. So the attack is thwarted in this regard. Now, the most famous and the most common injection attack is an SQL injection. This is stand for structured query language, and we talk about this in the database video. This occur when an attacker submit unauthorized SQL queries to a database through web application. So imagine you have a web application and you are using a form of something like that, and you are going to insert an SQL query into that form. Now, if you don't have an escape sequence, then an attacker might be able to derive information from the database. There's also an LDAP injection, where we are submitting unauthorized query to a directory server, like LDAP server, right? Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. So maybe we are looking for accounts, or maybe we try to get some other information from our directory server. Now, there is a lot of different way to do this, but what you need to understand for the exam is that we want to use authorized command only. And oftentimes that's done through structure or store procedure. Okay, that take us to broken authentication. So this is pretty straightforward. Poorly managed user accounts, poorly managed credential or authenticators, and poorly managed session tokens. This happen a lot, and this cause a huge problem. So we want to implement proper identity and access management, as well as proper session management. As we covered a lot of this in domain 5. We talked about good account and session management practice that will prevent an attacker from compromising these different accounts. That takes us to number 3, which is sensitive data exposure. So we talked about a lot about this in domain 2, right? Where sensitive data needs to be identified, categorized, and protected according to when it is in use, in transit, or in rest. So we want to encrypt and control sensitive data where possible, and discard data when it is no longer needed or required. So again, go back to domain 2 if you need some help with this particular vulnerability or this particular risk. That takes us to number 4, which is an XML external entity. This target vulnerabilities in how application parse XML data. So this is also called XSE or cross-site attack. As you might hear it called, basically the idea here is that XML application is not doing a great job parsing or breaking down or processing XML data. External entities are external files that contain XML code that are designed to be reused for XML document. The idea behind this is that when you are writing XML code, we are calling stored code that we want to reuse, so we don't have to rewrite it. And when we are calling outside of the document itself, that's an external entity, so we are calling outside of the document control, and that's how you can actually influence what going on inside the XML document, right? So that's what an attacker is focused on here. So this can cause denial of service. You can be vulnerable to forgery attacks, unauthorized disclosure of sensitive data, things like that, right? So think of these external entities as external modules. These modules are made up of that XML code, and we are going to call that. Okay, now how to protect again this is to make sure that all of the XML libraries and the parsers, whatever processing the XML code, are current and up to date with latest security patch and updates. We also want to block external entities and document type definitions, DTDs, in that XML code itself. That's going to prevent the DTD processing. And it's also a good idea to install web application firewall for anything we are trying to protect on XML side. Now the DTD will allow you the capability of defining an entity. If you are disable this, then the coder cannot, or an attacker cannot define the entity. And the entity has to do with, it could be an XML doc, it could be an Excel document, it could be whatever, a PDF document, whatever you are calling within the XML code itself. Okay, so by disabling this, it will restrict the XML to process eternally only, and then we can scan that using a static application security test, right? So our SAS test to look through the source code and determine it, all of these things, and are configured and set correctly. Okay, so again, this is at the source code level, so that's what we are focused on here. So that take us to number 5, which is broken access control. This is pretty straightforward as well. Of course, we want to prevent privilege or authorization creep, where we have unauthorized access that can lead to exposure of sensitive data or information. So we want to permit subject access to object by exception only and deny by default, right? We talked about a lot about this in domain 5, and then we want to regularly assess privilege levels and update them as necessary. So when we look at this 5 risk at a network level, right, at the system level, again we have those injection attack, right? Well, here your authentication server, which is probably a directory server, that might be LDAP enabled, so we can do LDAP injection against that. So in this case, we want to look at defense and depth, right, where we are going to protect this particular server because it's in our screen subnet or our DMZ. We are going to have our WAN routers, our firewalls, and some network switches in that path to protect that particular server. And maybe we want to install a host-based firewall, which is kind of the minimum that we want from an endpoint protection. And also we want to make sure that our LDAP code has escape sequence built in. So if any input comes into the LDAP server, we want to reject them if we don't recognize them, right? Same with web server. If someone processing something on the web application or a web form, maybe we have like a contact form on there, and hey, give us your name and how much money you make and all this different stuff, maybe an SQL query can be put into that form and then call the backend database. That might be, say, on this infrastructure server here, or it might be on a storage server, whatever it is, right? Now it's calling the data. If that is not authorized, we want to escape that sequence, right? So broken authentication being number 2. Of course, we have our users out here. We are going to authenticating to this different server. We want to make sure that the accounts are kept up to date, that the password are strong, that the authenticators are strong, and that we are implementing proper session management. Then number 3 was data, right? So we have data on the storage server, we are going to have data on the web server, we are going to have data all over the system, right? So we want to make sure we identify, categorize, and protect accordingly. And then we have the cross-site attacks, where the XML external entities attack. That's going to be primarily here on this web server for the most part, but there's other places where we could be parsing or processing XML code. So we want to identify that and have controls in place. And then number 5 was broken access control, which comes back to the broken authentication, where those two go hand in hand. And we want to make sure that we are implementing proper access control across the system. And as part of the continuous monitoring, we are keeping an eye on those things and evaluating them regularly. So the bottom line for the first video of OWASP is to understand the security risk we talked about here and the necessary mitigation for them as well.